Welcome to the North Middlesex Regional School District School Committee meeting on December 3rd at 7 p.m. This is being live streamed by Pepperell Community Media, which access channel 194 and 192. I am informing the committee and the audience members that this is being recorded, and the next scheduled meeting of the North Middlesex Regional School Committee is scheduled for Thursday, January 16th, 2024 at 6 p.m. We are canceling our December 12th meeting. In present, we have June McNeil. Here. Bill Berg.
Here.
Jill Twigg.
Here.
Lisa Bloom.
Here.
Tom Casey.
Here.
Randy Rush.
Here.
Patrick McPhillips.
Here.
Will Hackler.
Here.
And myself, Lisa Martin. For administration, we have Brad Morgan, Superintendent, Nancy Haynes, Business Manager, Gary Reese, Assistant Superintendent, and Robin Ivy, our Administrative Assistant. All right. Will somebody make a motion on the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
That was seconded by June. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, moving on. Public comment. All right, public comment. According to our policy BEDH, each person will have 3 minutes to speak with a maximum of 15 minutes. We have 4 community members wanting to speak tonight. Our first one is Cindy King. Is Cindy available? She is not present. We will move on to Craig Hansen.
All right, good evening. And thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Craig Hansen, and I am from Pepperell. I'm here to communicate both disappointment and hope. While I appreciate the committee's willingness to host an open forum a couple weeks ago, I'm disappointed by the fact the committee was not sitting up on the stage backing their admin team. I'm disappointed direct questions were not being answered transparently. I'm disappointed by short-term, seemingly political decisions being considered rather than long-term strategic ones. I'm disappointed by backroom conversations driving agendas rather than open collaboration to solve this large-scale problem. And I'm disappointed in members of the public yelling and misdirecting their anger. None of you deserve to be the recipients of that. But here's where I have hope. In September 2023, Ashby Elementary was recognized by DESE as a top-performing school in Massachusetts, attributed to high achievement and strong growth in areas such as MCAS performance, low chronic absenteeism, and high graduation rates. As our students do, perhaps this committee can learn something from Ashby Elementary. It is a story of perseverance, and my hope is that this committee will take a hard look at the structure of this district and ask the tough questions, dig deep, and formulate a long-term plan. We don't need 7 buildings, and our students need to come first. Why is this committee not creating and implementing a long-term facilities plan? Where is the public-facing advocacy for what we all know our students need and deserve? Closing any functioning school building will not solve anything and will only serve to create more problems. You can only cut money by closing a building one time. Once it's gone, it's gone. Where will you cut next time? What are the benefits to the students by closing a functioning school? This committee needs to be advocating for our students, all of them. We are NM, all of us. We're not here to single out a minority group and take resources away. We're here to build everyone up and make this district stronger. MCOG, which is the North Middlesex Council of Governments, recently conducted a survey in Pepperell, and they asked what the town should do with additional resources or excess funds that they may have. Hypothetical, of course. And what they came back with was increase in education spending being the number 2 answer. About 22% of the respondents Only 22% ranked that as a low priority. When ranking services, there was the strongest support for fire, ambulance, and police, as expected, and educational services, all of which were ranked as first or second priority out of 16 total services by more than 70% of respondents. This demonstrates that there is public support for our educational system. This past June, Education Week published "The Harm of School Closures Can Last a Lifetime," based on newly conducted research. To quote, "Students who attend a school that closes during their K-12 career have lower test scores along with worse attendance and behavior in the short term. In the long term, they're less likely than their peers to complete college and have a job, and their earnings tend to be lower." I'll reiterate something I said at the last meeting. School is not just about the time spent sitting at a desk in a classroom. It's the relationships, the bus ride, the teachers, our youngest students needing a local place to call home during the day to build relationships with those in their neighborhood. You are up there because we all have faith in you to make the tough decisions. In that process, we expect all data to be looked at and presented to the public transparently. I hope you're looking at all options and advocating strongly to the state for assistance. I know the decision's not easy. I appreciate all the hard work that every single one of you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Next, we'll have Kathy Bolaris.
So, even though I'm an appointed member of the School Finance Subcommittee representing Ashby, there have been no Finance Committee meetings, and I've not been allowed to participate except for this public comment. What I've done is I've analyzed several documents from the school containing information related to schools, staff, and services. I would suggest that no school committee member should form an opinion or vote on an issue that is not based on their own investigation and analysis of firsthand credible data. Further, if the information is not available, I ask that you refuse to vote on an issue until it is received and you have a chance to review it. These are some areas that I've looked at, and I'm happy to discuss them with any of you individually at another time. The capacity and usage of each building results in many questions, and the data shared with the public is even more suspect. Based on information that I've uncovered, this is of great concern. Secondly, the current budget shows inconsistencies that do not accurately reflect what expenses are in excess and can be viewed as areas to reduce for FY26. Third, all intake of funds and accounts with positive balances should be included with any type of financial information that's released to the public. If a complete and transparent financial picture is being painted by each school committee member when it's being presented, it's only fair that it include money that's in the till, so to speak, as well as expenses. Number 4, the costs of each building are a bit misleading as they do not reflect credits that sometimes impact the bottom line of a facility. So, again, I think it's the responsibility of each of you, not because someone told you something, but to actually obtain the data, look at it, analyze it, and come up with your own opinions on what makes sense, what you feel it's appropriate to support, or what you don't feel is appropriate to support. Lastly, I just want to request that going forward, that meetings be hybrid and Zoom. And the reason I'm saying that is I look back on the history of the last 12 months, there were 19 full school committee meetings. 84% of those were either Zoom or hybrid. Only 3 of the meetings were in person only. And of those 3, 2 of them had in-depth financial discussions. That does not lend itself to transparency. The fact that Pepperell is broadcasting is a nice to do, but if each town select board can actually do hybrid meetings, I don't know why the school committee can't as well. and I think it's a way that people can stay involved, watch things real time, or have the option to come here and see things in person. So I would ask going forward that you consider that option and do hybrid or Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Sandra Lord?
Sandra Lord from Townsend, and wow, it's tough to follow these two. I just wanted to find out about the status. Are you any closer to making a decision? How close are we about the balance in the budget, and which schools you're opting to look at to close? I guess I'm supposed to talk to the chair. Are you talking to my questions?
The school committee can't answer you back
Okay. Oh, I'm
on these
sorry.
things.
Okay.
But
new to
there
this.
will be a discussion tonight about the budget.
Oh, okay. That's my concern, and I also have a concern. I saw something online. It was some kind of document. I was looking for it just now, and I couldn't find it, generated for the town, and I'm not sure what entity generated this multi-page document, but it showed this 40R district, and it starts before the town hall, and it goes way into, I think, West Townsend, and Spalding Memorial is right in that district, and according to 40R, it rehabs historical buildings. And I cannot help but think, according to the cost alternative study, where it shows, I'll go back, the bullet point was something like a decision on Ashby Elementary is pivotal for the futures of Squanicook and Spalding, and that was right in the cost alternatives study that I was looking right on the district website. So I'm thinking, if the town's looking at this 40R, Spalding is right there. So Spalding was totally renovated in '94. My son was the first class to go straight through in the newly renovated building. It's the one that has the least amount of fixing to do. I think it has something like $625,000, maybe to make it more handicapped accessible or something like that. But otherwise, it's in good shape, and it's a really, really nice building. Having said that, I would hate to see, and I go along with the gentleman that was speaking, I think it is detrimental to close schools. We can only close it once, and we save, but what happens after that? We already closed Peter Fitzpatrick back in the day. We closed Squanicook Elementary. We stuffed all the kids in Spalding, up to grade 4. And, oh, by the way, Spalding has a very steady number of students, according to that cost alternative study. Nissitissit and Vernon Brook are pretty full. I mean, I think even Hawthorne Brook, they found alternative uses with special needs in each classroom. So pretty much every classroom has a function. And to just cut that would be very detrimental to the students. I do know Ashby Elementary is the most costly. I was looking at that, but again, to close a town's only school is detrimental. I don't know what the answer is. I just wish the state would step up and do the appropriate funding for our district. They failed us, and that's where we have to be pushing. It sounds like it might be too late to go that route for the school budget. I just don't know what the answer is. But for any of these schools to close, it'd be really, really unfortunate for our children. I do not have anybody in the district right now. But, I have a grandchild that may be, that's going to be coming along that may be in the district in a few years, and I would really hate to see drastic changes. Well, I guess I don't have anything else to say, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Sandra. Moving on to new business, out-of-state field trip request. Ms. Smith? Martha?
Once again, the New York Service Learning Group is going on their field trip to New York, and they're going in April leaving on the Friday before vacation and going for 5 days. Their itinerary, I believe you have. It is subject to change because the places that they go usually don't get it fully committed until January, but it's pretty much the agenda that they're looking to do. It's similar to last year, and they're just looking for approval to be able to go.
Thank you. I know my kids are going on this trip, and they enjoy it, and it's well-managed, and it's a great time. They continue to go.
Yeah, there's 32 students are going, and there's going to be 4 chaperones. 2 of them are staff members, and the 2 are parents that will be attending.
Anyone from the committee have any questions? May I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Who? Bill and Randy. All right, all of those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you.
I wish them all luck this year. It has been wonderful through the years, I've heard.
They're very excited.
All right. I'll speak on that. The Advocate for a Fair Education funding letter is a letter that was in the packet that we will be sending out to the community. And it's a letter that states our representatives' email addresses, phone numbers, and websites that you can advocate for the state and federal funding. And I think listed on there are Margaret Scarsdale, Senator John Cronin, Senator Ed Kennedy, and Congress Representative Lori Trehan. And then Governor Healy is on there as well. Does anybody from the committee have any questions? Does somebody want to make a motion to approve?
So moved.
That's
What are we calling it?
Yeah. And Patrick seconded. Thank you. All right. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. All right, now. There's no subcommittee reports. We're on to finance. All right, Will. Your turn.
Superintendent? Who would you like to go ahead?
Am I to start?
Yes.
You can
Okay.
start.
So as we shared last week at the budget forum, the North Middlesex Regional School District currently to present a budget that is level services for FY26. So that's just the budget that is basically sliding everything we have this year into next year, would be an increase of 4.43% or $3 million over FY25, which factors in increases in contracts, health insurance, transportation, and rising special education costs. It's important to note that the current numbers are based on assumptions. The governor does not release her preliminary budget until the end of January. In addition, we will continue to monitor special education costs as those have increased significantly since the start of the school year. It was shared this morning that the Senate Ways and Means Chair proposed his outlook for FY26, stating it's not looking good to a couple of reasons. Those being revenue trends continue to plateau or drop, seeing 2 to 3% in growth, while spending trends are increasing at 4 to 6%. Also, that federal funding, ARPA and ESSER funds, have been spent by most school districts, North Middlesex being one of them. At our last school committee meeting, the administrative team was charged with coming up with some options that would result in reductions to avoid a need for a propositional 2.5 override. The options included cutting approximately $500,000 in curriculum and technology that would require the district to play catch-up in subsequent years, as these reductions are not permanent. They would be a one-year potential solution. Building closures and staff reductions. It's important to note that if building closures are not considered, approximately $2.5 million would need to be cut from staffing, which will have a devastating impact on our ability to maintain sensible class sizes. To be honest with everyone, when we talk about cutting $2.5 million in staff, I'm not comfortable cutting even $500,000 in staff. We're not in a position to be making staff reductions that are that significant. Our class sizes are already quite large and will increase significantly if we do go ahead and reduce by $2.5 million. With a current educator shortage, this could lead to our staff leaving for districts that receive more state funding and have more openings. In total, we have 6 options to share with you this evening, all of which have at least one building closing. I will go through each option, but I would also direct community members back to our extensive FAQ document that was shared with the community just prior to Thanksgiving. This is a document that we will continue to update as additional questions come in. We had 2 questions come in on Monday. We've updated the document. We will continue to do that. The FAQ and all of our budget documents can be found on our budget website, which is nmrsdbudget.org. It is separate from the school district's website. In closing, I need to point out that while some of these reductions are long-term, building closures being one of them, if the building closes, that is a long-term reduction. We will see increases in our budget drivers every year, which will make savings from reductions we make this year potentially obsolete in years to come, because we will always have the increases in contracts, health insurance, special education, and transportation. Every single year, those will increase, and we will see an increase to our budget. But a building closure, if it stays closed, would be something that would be long-term. While reductions rarely have a positive impact, we will need the state to step in soon to address the formula that is out of date and does not properly serve the students and staff of regional school districts. So at this point, I'll go through each of the options. Okay. So option number 1 has Squanicook with pre-K in grades K to 1. Ashby and Townsend, pre-K would remain district-wide. Ashby would close. Spalding Memorial would be grades 2 to 4, Ashby and Townsend. Varnum Brook would be K to 4, Pepperell. Hawthorne Brook would be grades 5 through 8, Ashby and Townsend. Nissitissa would be 5 through 8, Pepperell. And North Middlesex Regional High School would be 9 to 12, as it is now. The closing of Ashby Elementary alone is $381,000 in technology and maintenance costs. The pros in looking at this is we do have to look at the amount of property that we have to maintain, and our per pupil expenditures are based on partially the number of buildings that we have. It's the lease reconfiguration of students. Ashby still has a lengthy capital list. The demolition of the vacated wing may set in motion up-to-date ADA accessibility compliance, which would be costly, and allows for equitable class sizing in K to 4 district-wide. The cons, the closure of the only building in Ashby. It's the only elementary school, it's the only school in Ashby. And it has lower financial savings when compared to other options. Option 2, similar with Squanicook, grades pre-K district-wide, K to 1 Ashby Townsend. This model, or this option, does close both Ashby Elementary and Spalding Memorial. Varnum Brook remains K to 4 for Pepperell. Hawthorne Brook goes K to 5, Ashby Townsend. Nissitissa is grade 5 Pepperell, but also grade 6 and 7 district-wide, and the high school becomes grades 8 to 12. The closing of Ashby and Spalding combined would be just under $916,000. The pros would be saving in facilities and technology costs, creating an Ashby Townsend campus, K to 5, between Squanicook and Hawthorne Brook. Moving the 8th grade to the high school may help retain students. Creating a district-wide 6-7 model at a more appropriate building for science and engineering classes. Allows for equitable class sizes. Potential for more students to remain at the high school versus transferring to the to technical schools, private schools, potential reductions in travel for multilingual and special education service providers. 8th graders would have access to certain high school extracurriculars and athletics because they would be housed under the same principal. Cons would be, again, closure of the only school building in Ashby, the length of the bus ride from Ashby to Pepperell. If the high school population grows, reconfiguration would likely be needed, and extracurriculars for grade 8, drama, art, and athletics. Option 3, Squannacook is grades K to 4 Townsend, Ashby, grades K to 4, Ashby and West Townsend. Spalding Memorial would close. Varnum Brook would be K to 4 Pepperell. Hawthorne Brook would be 5 to 8 Ashby Townsend, as it is now. Nissitissit would be grades 5 to 8 Pepperell, as it is now. And the high school would have the pre-K here, district-wide, and grades 9 to 12. The savings of closing Spalding Memorial alone would be $535,085. The pros would be that all elementary and middle schools have the same grade configuration. It balances class sizes and early childhood education options for high school students. Cons would be that Spalding has 9 more classrooms than Ashby Elementary, leaving less room for growth. May need to add additional busing. And pre-K at the high school would cause for the current pre-K playground to be moved, and also for bathroom conditions to be addressed if the pre-K was here. Option 4 has Squannacook pre-K district-wide again, K to 1, Ashby Townsend, closes both Ashby and Spalding. Varnum Brook is K to 5, Pepperell. Hawthorne Brook is 2 to 5, Ashby Townsend. Nissitissit Middle is 6 to 8 district-wide. The high school is 9 to 12 district-wide. Again, a savings of just under $916,000. The savings in costs and facilities, as I just mentioned, would be high. It would create an Ashby Townsend campus K to 5, creating a district-wide 6 to 8 model with a more appropriate building for science and engineering, a full theater, band, and music rooms, which currently does not exist at Hawthorne Brook. Shared middle school extracurriculars in drama, art, and athletics. And again, both middle schools right now are separate. Potential reductions in travel time for multilingual and special education service providers, and more consistent programming for academics and extracurriculars for students entering the high school. Cons, closing the only school building in Ashby, leaving little room for growth if enrollment increases, the length of the bus ride from Ashby to Pepperell. Option 5, Squannacook, pre-K district-wide, grades K to 1 Townsend, Ashby, grades K to 5 Ashby only. Spalding Memorial would close. Varnum Brook, K to 5 Pepperell. Hawthorne Brook, 2 to 5 Townsend. Nissitissit, 6 to 8 district-wide. The high school, 9 to 12 district-wide, a savings of $535,085. Pros would be savings of facilities and technology costs, creating a district-wide 6 to 8 model, as I mentioned in one of the other models, for more appropriate science engineering, having the full theater, band, and music rooms, shared middle school extracurriculars, drama, arts, and athletics, room for growth if enrollment increases, more consistent programming for academics and extracurriculars for students entering the high school. Cons would be the length of the bus ride from Ashby to Pepperell. And again, Spalding has 9 more classrooms than Ashby does, leaving less room for growth. Adding grade 5 to Varnum Brook would be a challenge. And option 6 would be Squannacook, K to 4, Townsend, Ashby, K to 6, Ashby. Spalding would close. Varnum Brook, K to 4, Pepperell. Hawthorne Brook, 5 to 6, Townsend. 7 to 8, Ashby Townsend. Nissitissit, 5 to 8, Pepperell. And the high school would be pre-K district-wide, 9 to 12 as well. The savings of $535,085. Pros would be the savings in facilities and technology costs. There'd be room for growth. Students are educated in their town until at least 6th grade. Early childhood education options for high school students. Cons, again, would be the difference in size between Spalding and Ashby. Just some notes. Yeah, there we go. Look, there's a whole page. Is it all up there? Does it say notes at the top? Thank you. So just in notes, options that have the 8th grade moving to the high school would likely involve 8 modular classrooms in year 2, as the high school capacity is at 870. So if students actually are retained and they stop moving to privates and charter schools at the rate that they are now, keeping students in that start at the high school could potentially increase our enrollment and again require modular classrooms. Bus routes would need to be considered, but one of those considerations would not be increasing to 4 tiers because of the cost. We don't believe the majority of these options would not require a 4th tier. Grade 8, again, as I talked about, moving to the high school, keep kids potentially in district. The modular classrooms are very different than they've been in the past. 8 new modular classrooms would be approximately $2 million, and they have a 40-year life expectancy to them. They come with their own HVAC and bathrooms as well. So you could potentially create an 8th grade campus in the back of this building. Squanicook would maintain business and HR offices in all scenarios. The remaining central office administrators would be located to other open spaces in the district. Once school committee approves the direction, special education sub-separate programs may also need to be relocated. Building consolidation may allow for a better distribution of this programming. Both Ashby and Spalding are leased properties, where closing a building that the district owns is more complicated. In order to close a building that we own, we would need special legislation to sell the building, and it is unknown where the proceeds from that sale go. Some consideration for when a class at Ashby gets split. There are significant issues among staff with regard to equity and workload. This may require a policy modification, again, if Ashby remains open, where currently it says any K-4 class that reaches 30 students will be split. Any K-4 class that reaches 25 students will be looked at by the administration. The issue that we have oftentimes, cost does come into it, is that if you split a class up that reaches 30 at Ashby Elementary, you have 2 sections of 15, where at Spalding and at Varnum Brook, if you split a class up, you're generally going to still maintain that mid-20 number. So it is different. Any building closed would likely need to be up to date with ADA compliance in order to reopen. So if a building closes and it's determined that it may be reopened, it would have to be up to date potentially with ADA compliance. Future capacity issues could strengthen the district's case for an MSBA project with Hawthorne Brook. Last year, we tried for an MSBA project with Hawthorne Brook, and quite honestly, the MSBA felt that we had too much space. We had other options. So again, that may, where Hawthorne Brook does require some work, and some of these options have Townsend and Ashby students going to Nissitissit because of the up-to-date labs, the full performing arts center, the engineering space, the full music and art rooms. Those are things that are very, they just don't exist in the same way at Hawthorne Brook. So again, potentially getting approved for a building project down the line so that Hawthorne Brook can be brought really to a current space where previously it was more of an open concept by design school. The estimated cost savings that we have, I can go through them quickly. I will just round them for you because it was a request to see all buildings. Again, Spalding is about $535,000. This is for facilities and technology only. Hawthorne Brook, $645,000. Ashby Elementary is $381,000. Squanicook is $391,000. Varnum Brook is $609,000. Nissitissit is $707,000, and the high school is $1.4 million. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions from the committee?
I have one.
Jill Twin.
I appreciate all the hard work that you guys worked on these 6 choices, but I find it a little disheartening that special education is not listed in any of those programs. I would not feel comfortable voting on any of these without knowing where the special education programs are going.
So I would say all of the options do include special education programming. I would say that if we're going to look at primarily the sub-separate programs, something that we do want to keep in mind once the committee gives us a direction is looking at the amount, essentially, what does the van transportation look like? Could it remain in Pepperell, or would it be better to spread it out? What does that look like? Also, what do the service providers' days look like? What we do try to do, if you have a service provider, is do our best with eliminating travel, because if you have travel, that's a teaching block that they're not teaching and they're traveling. So we do try to minimize the amount of travel that our service providers would do. So in some of the options, quite honestly, in options where Hawthorne Brook is 2 to 5 potentially for Ashby and Townsend, we would likely have to have special education programs in both Townsend and Pepperell. But I will say that there is space, just because of the space study that we did. There is space for all of our sub-separate programs, but also for our inclusion staff as well. But
Okay.
we just want to make sure it's properly balanced throughout the district.
Thank you for answering that question.
Anyone else have any questions?
I have a comment, not a question. I just wanted to comment on the cons for anything that entailed closing Ashby. It was a very simple con in this presentation, closure of only building in Ashby. But that does entail a lot more than just closing a building. It's inequity among the students, a lack of community and sense of security for students, long bus rides, and not just long, they're already an hour with the school 5 minutes away. So I can't even imagine how much time would be taken out of these kids' days, not to mention the possible increase in busing costs, a huge decrease in home values. If we took only 10%, that is a loss of $56 million to the town of Ashby, to homeowners. The dramatic shift in the demographic, Ashby would not be family-friendly, and Ashby would see a reduction in students. With that reduction, Pepperell and Townsend would see an increase automatically in their enrollment numbers and an increase to the amount that they need to pay toward the budget. Not to mention the impact to the social emotional learning, increased IEPs, and honestly, I think if we did close Ashby's only school, that Ashby would never, ever pass a building project or an override in the district again. So there's a lot more factors to consider than the one fragment of a sentence that's there. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Anyone else? Randy?
These space studies that were done for these 6 options, can you let everybody know what class sizes it was based on, as well? Yeah, why don't we start with that? So what class size do these 6 options have for the children to be able to fit into the buildings?
So as far as, as far as the class sizes go, we were basing this off of if we had to close buildings and cut staff. So we were looking at larger class sizes in the high 20s to low 30s. If we don't look at building closures and we look strictly at potentially 2.5 million in staff, we would have a real problem fitting students into classrooms and managing classrooms, because we would likely be in the high 30s.
Also, so looking forward, if we get more money, we'd probably end up with a reconfiguration, possibly, just because we wanted smaller class sizes.
I didn't get the question.
So if these are based on high 20s to low 30s class size to fit into the buildings with these configurations, if we get resources from the state in future years and we can reduce the class size back down to 26 or even, go back a couple of decades to when we actually had 21, 22 per classroom, would this require another reconfiguration just to be able to reduce class sizes?
So I don't think I can speak to whether or not it would require another reconfiguration, but I will say that even in the worst case scenario, if we closed 2 buildings, we did run the numbers at 24 kids in a class, and we did have space in the district with 5 buildings.
And was any studies done or any calculations done on the physical space in the classrooms? If I remember correctly, when we were in the middle of COVID and we needed 6 feet between students, we had a lot of our classrooms barely were able to accommodate half of the class that was currently in them. Do we have the physical space, and are there any requirements from the MSBA or DESE on the number of square feet per child in a general ed classroom?
As far as the COVID numbers, we don't have the space now to go 6 feet.
Oh, no, not to go, but I'm just saying, with a high 20s, low 30s, will that fit into all of the classrooms?
Yes.
So we did studies looking at the square foot, and does MSBA have any minimum square feet per child that is needed in a general ed classroom? I know for building, if you're doing a new building or renovations, they do have square foot requirements.
To my knowledge, DESE only has requirements for kindergarten, does not have it for grades 1 to 12, and MSBA, again, to my knowledge, only has recommendations based on building projects. And I would just add again that here at the high school, where I would say that where it's a new building and we had the square footage to look at, we are definitely over in some of our classes here at the high school as far as the amount of space that was designed for the kids.
Anyone else? Tom?
Are there, speaking of class size, are there numbers with each of these options on what the class size might look like?
So all of our projections, if we were to cut between 2 million and 1.5, between 1.5 and $2 million, I'm sorry, it looks as though we're going to be in the 28 to 34 range. If we go beyond that, it could be worse. Something that we don't know for sure yet, because it is starting to organize, is that if you do start merging schools, does that through attrition lead to reductions just based on class size? So not necessarily cutting a job for financial reasons, but because you're merging a class and you can actually do it with 3 sections instead of 4 because 2 buildings have merged. Does that make sense? So that's something that we haven't delved into that much, because it is, again, something that requires scheduling the building and scheduling the kids. And we cannot, there's no way that we can schedule the buildings with these 6 options. That's something that we would need. We would need a direction from the committee on which option you want us to explore.
The other thing, just looking at some of the numbers and then projections. So, I mean, Nissitissit would go from 465 to 702. Varnum would go from 476 to 684. Hawthorne would go from 466 to 366. Is that what you're kind of looking at in terms of some of the programming? Because again, where you mentioned Nissitissit or Varnum, it's going to be tough if we're kind of adding grades to those schools. And I just don't want to make a decision if we're not quite sure about the space.
So again, can you tell me which document you're referencing, Mr. Casey? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
As far as-
absolutely. So just looking at, so in the options for FY 2026.
Yep.
So the enrollment by town and grade, so I just kind of did like what's there now. And so I totaled those numbers. And then I compared that with what some of these options would be, and then looking at like the projected enrollments for, say, again, if you were to add K to 5 at Varnum, and then kind of just compared that. So
in all the options, we did look at the number of students that would be in the building. I actually don't have that document in front of me this evening, but we did look at the enrollment in all of the buildings. Some of this, again, in looking at classroom space, if you look at Nissitissit and some of the other buildings in the district, there are classrooms where there are, it may be a special education classroom that has 12 kids in it, but it was designed for a full classroom. So in some cases, we would be reallocating space for classrooms and relocating smaller groups to suitable spaces elsewhere in the district. But again, looking to maintain a manageable number of van rides and also a manageable schedule for our service providers, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Any more questions from anyone? June?
Just a quick question. I'm wondering how and when we're soliciting community feedback. I know that we put out there community input is vital and will guide the committee's decision-making. And we had a forum that we gave about 6 days' notice for people to come in person and told them there would be a small amount of time for a small amount of questions. So although we did allow quite a bit of time, I don't think we conveyed that to the public. So I'm wondering what the timeline is for this decision-making as far as voting on options, and when and how we'll get community input.
Do you want me to answer that? Yes? I wouldn't say it was 6 days' notice. I did put out a newsletter in mid-October with the date, announcing it the first time. So there was a good amount of notice in my initial newsletter that went out to families. As far as timeline as to when we need a decision, we need a decision now. We have a budget hearing coming up on February 6th. And we have to plan our budget around that. Again, I'm not looking, I realize, as I said earlier, nothing that we do tonight or nothing that we do until something happens at the state level is going to solve our budget problem. Our budget problem is going to exist every year. If we save money this year, all those budget drivers will increase next year. May not be by $3 million, but it's going to be a substantial amount. And until the state steps in and does something, we actually need to do something, because there's no way that we can keep operating on a budget that, by all accounts, based on our meetings with town leadership, is not going to pass, and there will be no override. That's what has been shared with us since August. So we do have to schedule a building, we have to look at staffing, and we have to give our staff notice, and we do ultimately have to give our building leaders the opportunity to schedule buildings and consult with them around how we can best make this, how we can best make whatever model the school committee selects work. But generally speaking, I've given my budget narrative to the school committee, if not late November, in December. That can't happen. I don't have enough information unless I'm just going to put out a budget that is a 4.43% increase and has no chance of passing. And that's quite honestly something that's a multi-page, 25, 30-page document, and if it has no chance of passing, we would be better off spending our time on a budget that does have a chance of passing. So I would say that we need a decision from the school committee very soon. And we don't have another meeting in December.
Any questions, Randy?
So my first comment is, I thought we had voted, I don't know if it was the last meeting or the one before that, that we were going to try for an override, and we haven't talked about what that reduced number would be. Because I will not sit here and vote on anything if we are not going to fight for these children and fight for these students for what we, what we think they absolutely need. I cannot see cutting this as a first option, and everything here tonight is being talked about, that this is what we're going for, and this is the final answer that we have to give a decision tonight.
Tom?
It's supposed to be Plan B.
Tom, did you raise your hand first? Nope. Okay. Patrick?
I think what's being overlooked is that even with the largest cut of two buildings, we're still looking at between $1.5 and $2 million of teachers and faculty cut. And I am from the mindset of faculty and teachers are more important than buildings. So even with an override, I'm not sure that saving buildings makes more sense than saving teachers, saving faculty.
Okay. Will?
I got a few questions, or a few pieces on it. So, we are asking for the override piece. We sat up here, we had the public forum, we've been discussing that with the town administrators to try to work through that piece of it. Lisa and I also have a meeting coming up in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
That we've
Our
been
next
invited to with those representatives. Very thankful, I think from the public forum that came up. If we didn't have that, if we didn't do that, I don't think we would have been invited to a meeting to discuss those in further. But we do need to look at these other things. One of the questions I have, I'm sorry, I'm going to direct it to you, June, down the end here, because option 3, is it still up there? Option 3, talks about having, West Towns in Ashby. With the Ashby Building Committee, capital stuff, do you have an estimated number for, the repairs necessary for Ashby?
And we have a plan I can send you right now. Essentially, the biggest projects have already been done. The current projects we're looking at is really a facelift, which is what the town, part of the original instruction. So all new flooring on the foyer, the entryway, whole first floor carpet, whole second floor carpet, ceilings, painting, just really a facelift, because we've already done the asbestos and we've already done the heating, which actually is another just side question, which schools do have the heat redundancy, because I know that keeps being brought up when we talk about E&D and stuff, is worry about a boiler. So Ashby does have the 2 boilers now. We do have the heat redundancy. We don't have any safety issues to address at the moment. So, eventually we could probably do some cafeteria upgrades and a vertical stair lift rather than the stair lift that's there now. But there's not a huge amount of projects or costs on Ashby at the moment. There's not.
What about the cost of the demo of the 50s wing?
That would not be on the school. That's not something that the school's even using. That's a portion that the town wanted to hold on to, and the town may at some point be repurposing that, in which case the town would take care of the asbestos and whatever they do. If they want to build a senior center, or if they decide it's not worth it and take that part out, that doesn't really have anything to do with the current school, the part that's used.
But the school district's responsible for maintaining that part of it currently, right?
If that's what's on the lease, I'm not sure why that's still on the lease at this point, because it's not something that the school The school had to get everything out of there a few years ago, and it's sealed off, so there's not, the district isn't doing anything with that portion. It's just not being utilized as part of the lease.
So does the building, your building committee there in Ashby have like a total number for the capital projects that needs to be done over there?
I don't know if we have all the estimates. I can send you the project thing in a minute if I can find it. But no, we don't have a total number, but it's certainly not anywhere near some of the projected numbers were, such as heat was projected over 300,000 and it was taken care of for 70,000.
With the kitchen renovations, what is all in the kitchen renovations area? Because I know that the coolers are broken.
Yeah, the coolers that are built into the building are broken, and other coolers have been purchased in the meantime, and that's probably the way they're gonna go. It's not really worth it to fix the ones that are part of the building. They're using that for other storage and stuff at the moment. Or not other storage, still food storage, but not food storage that has to stay at that temperature, essentially. Because they do have the other refrigerators and freezers in there. So as far as cafeteria, eventually, like the floor, maybe in some equipment upgrades, but it's
Also,
not-
the school itself is on a water well for it's the only school that's on the well, on a
Yeah,
well.
everything in Ashby is on wells, yep.
And so we maintain the well in that area, right, for the school?
I don't think the district does.
Yes, the district does. A project was done there a few years ago. Randy was on the committee. Right.
I'd have to go back and see. I do remember that there were some things that we had done because we were sharing the well with the town. So I'm not sure where that landed as far as who takes care of it and how that gets split. I was going to say, does the administration know? I mean, they'd be the ones to let us know.
Yes, the water, the well. Who maintains the well? The district maintains it. The district maintains it, Nancy is saying. Any further questions? Randy?
I'd like to know from the administration two things. One, as far as the 6 options, it's great that we have 6 options in front of us and we have some pros and some cons. I'd really like to hear, since you were very intimate in putting this together, one, what were your priorities when you were looking at other budget cuts versus building and staff? Because the staff sounds like it's just increasing class sizes. And 2, which of these options are on your top 2 that you would recommend to the school committee and why?
In speaking for the central office, I would say that when it comes to prioritizing, we absolutely do prioritize staff over buildings. As far as making other reductions, I feel as though we've answered a lot of questions. We've gone through line items, and we've identified $500,000 outside of staffing that could potentially be cut, which would also have ramifications quite soon. I would say down the road, but it would be quite soon. And they're not permanent reductions. So the only priority that unfortunately we were able to look at, because we do feel as though our budget is quite thin already, is prioritizing staff over buildings.
Where do students come in on this? I would put students at the forefront. Personally, I would try and keep 4, because right now I 100% agree with everything that's been said by the administration, that our budget is bare bones. It's less than bare bones in some places. And I 100% agree that we are in a bad spot. We need more funding. We need more for the students. But my philosophy is I would rather go for status quo for the students, keep them in the same size classrooms, keep them with the same programs, keep them with the same education that they're getting right now, and forego advancement in the district until we can afford it more, or go backwards on some things like technology. One-to-one technology has been very expensive. When we went to it, we knew it was an increased cost. It was a huge benefit to the students and to the teachers. But is it time that we reconsider that, because we can't afford it anymore? And I know it would be an adjustment for teachers, an adjustment for some of the programs that rely on some of that technology. But I would much rather see us go backwards as far as technology and keep the students' education and what they see in front of them at the forefront.
Just to clarify, the prioritizing staff does prioritize students. I want to make sure that the class sizes are as manageable as possible. If we get up to numbers that are too high, they'll be, again, very difficult to manage, and students will unfortunately bear the brunt of that. So when I'm talking about staff, I'm putting students in with that, because students need good teachers, manageable class sizes in front of them.
Any further questions? Lisa Bloom.
Can you tell me how much you pay for the PR firm?
It's in that budget detail.
No, I think
It's,
I can't find it on the
It's on the budget
line item.
detail.
I can't find it on the budget.
it's all on. It's a small screen. Oh.
While we're looking for that, any further questions? Randy?
So I went looking at the DESE website at our DART schools, which surprisingly to me had changed over the years. But currently, our DART schools, DART for anybody out there, is the similar districts to demographics and other criteria that they have that we would be similar to are Amesbury, Danvers, Billerica, Triton, Dartmouth, Norton, Sandwich, North Attleboro, Belchertown, and East Longmeadow. And I took a quick look at how many buildings each of those schools have, what their per pupil cost is, what their enrollment is. We kind of fall sort of in the middle as far as per pupil cost. Obviously, the Amesbury, Danvers, Billerica, Triton, which are in the North Shore or inside of 495, had higher per pupil costs, but I don't think that surprises anybody. You had Dartmouth, Norton, Sandwich, and North Attleboro are on the South Shore, either on the Cape for Sandwich or down over by Rhode Island in the South Shore. Those were generally less, except for Sandwich, which is the Cape. Per pupil cost for us, and then obviously the two, Belchertown and East Longmeadow out west, were significantly less than our per pupil costs. And it didn't seem to matter on the number of buildings. You have Danvers is a little less than 1,000 per pupil cost greater than us, and they have 7 buildings. Billerica is in the same when they have 8 buildings. You have North Attleboro has 8 buildings, and they're about $3,000 per pupil cost less than us. So I wonder where in our budget are the huge differences between some of these budgets and ours, for them to be that drastically different with the same number of buildings, because the buildings are not driving our budget. So I think we need to take a deep dive into our budget on what are we doing different than some of these other districts if they can do it for so much less. And they have one-to-one technology in some of these I've checked out. They have a lot of the same things that we do. It's something to take a look at and compare ourselves and our budgets to see if there's savings that we didn't know about, or that they're doing something in a better way that we can adopt to save money in our budget.
Did you look at the special education programs?
All of them
Some of
had
these.
very similar special needs as us. So that's why if you take a look in the DART, they were all right around the same. And these were 2022 costs, or I think, which is what the DESE website has. And some of them had a higher rate of special needs and high needs students than us, and some of them had a little bit lower, but we are all probably within a 4 to 5% range.
I mean, I don't want to cherry pick, but Billerick is a giant school compared to us, and as you mentioned, like inside of 495, financially, it's not, I don't think, comparable. It's only one, but.
Yeah, they had 8 buildings and.
I was just going to add, a lot of the DART districts are difficult comps because if they're not regionals, they're operating under a different funding formula, or the funding formula addresses them differently. For instance, there are some of those hold harmless districts, some of those hold harmless Project 211 districts are actually receiving a significant amount of money. The only reason that they're on that list is because many of them have dropping enrollment, and even though they're getting the money, the only way that the regional schools can move forward is by getting as many state reps and as many senators as possible behind this. So even districts that aren't necessarily suffering, because Burlington and Waltham are 2 very well-funded districts, they're considered hold harmless, they're in Project 211. The only way that we can move forward is by getting those state legislators behind us. We need their state legislators too. So their enrollment's dropping, but they have other funding sources which we don't have. And many of our DART districts, Danvers being one of them, has, I would say, a bustling downtown, which again is not something that any of our 3 communities have. So it is there is a commercial tax base there.
Right, but the amount of money we get from the state doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the per pupil cost. That's irregardless of where the funding comes from. It's how much your budget is divided by the number of students.
The number of our per pupil costs, the number of buildings is only impacted by about 9%. The buildings are only about 9% of that operational building costs. 9% is factored into per pupil costs at DESE.
Right, so I'm just making the point that we have other places, Belchertown out west is certainly not a bustling town as far as I know. Out west, certainly their incomes are less, and they have 2,000 students, so less than us, 5 buildings, and they're at $16,413 for their per pupil cost. We're at $18,599 for 2022. I'm just saying there's drastic differences in some of these budgets, and I don't think it's being driven by the number of buildings.
Patrick?
So we've sat, Ray, and gone through the budget, though. Like, I agree that we are different than Belchertown, but we don't know what those differences are, whether it be special ed programs, whether it be they might not have one-for-one. Like, there's a lot of things it could be, but you've looked at our budget. Is there anything on there that you saw that could be cut? Because I know we sat and had a long meeting and went over this.
Yes. And no one seems to want to make, I shouldn't say no one says. Yes, I have identified a number of different cuts, and there were reasons why we can't go backwards in every one of those scenarios of what I have suggested, except for increasing class size seems to be the best of the worst, and I don't buy that.
I just Just remember, a lot of those recommendations were very small amounts of money.
I have come up with another list looking at it, and it was well over $1 million.
Have we seen that list?
And
Did
that
we share
didn't-
that list? I'm checking.
No, I had shared it with the administration.
Okay.
Any further questions? June?
Just a quick question regarding leased buildings and owned buildings. I understand we would need special legislation to sell a building. So have we looked into that? What does that entail? Has that been pursued at all? And why do we not know where the proceeds would go? And have we pursued that? And on that note, we were leasing Squanicook, and it's been brought up a couple times to potentially lease it again. And essentially the answer was nobody will lease it. But have we looked into that as well? Has anyone pursued any of these things?
So we have not looked into leasing or sale of the building primarily because both Squanicook and Hawthorne Brook share water and networking lines. And as far as, excuse me, and septic, I'm sorry. So any type of leasing or sale could potentially create a problem because that is something we have been told cannot be changed. It has to be as it is. It has to be a shared line. And again, a lot of the networking for Squanicook comes from Hawthorne Brook. As far as the leasing, it hasn't really been looked at because of the amount of leasing space that is available across the street here. There has been a significant amount of space for the past couple of years there are vacant offices across the street. I know the bank finally does have someone going in, but it appears to be, there seems to be a significant amount of leased space that's available now that is not being taken. Either way, the sewer and septic line would create a problem.
And I don't think, as a school district, we should get into leasing buildings. It's hard for us. We're not landlords. I mean, it's just how it should be. We're not the landlords.
Okay, I have another question. I know somebody from town reached out to DESI regarding the regional agreement that's in process right now and mentioned that we are entertaining school closures. And the contact at DESI was very surprised to hear that not only would we consider closing a school, but multiple schools. And said that they were going to start talking to people about it there because they were surprised. Nobody's informed them yet. Have we reached out to DESI at all? They also said that there is extra state money for emergency type issues. Has anybody requested any of that since we are clearly in a budget crisis?
I've reached out to DESI at least once in the past 2 years for emergency money, and they did help us out a couple of years ago with a multilingual teacher. As far as reaching out to DESI to communicate building closures, that, to my knowledge, is a school committee decision, not a DESI decision.
Just one more comment that doesn't have to do that with that in particular, but looking at the building costs, I did find it rather interesting that to run an entire elementary school, well, not run, but essentially the building costs are less than the cost of the building that central office and preschool are in. So Ashby is the lowest cost building, comparable to a nearly empty building. Just wanted to point that out.
So just to clarify, and again, I'm not going to say exactly, but I believe we have 2 empty classrooms at Squanicook right now. The Keystone is still there, so I would imagine the costs are being incorporated with Keystone being there. We have, I believe actually we only have 1 empty classroom at Squanicook because they actually are up on the 2nd floor now as well.
When are they leaving? I thought they had left already.
We couldn't hear you.
When is the flag,
They still haven't given me a final date
Okies
yet.
done? Okay.
Their lease runs until December, but they'll continue to pay until they leave.
Any more questions? Next steps?
Well, I think we started to ask this question, but what's the administration's recommendation of these 6 options?
The administration feels that option 4 would be our best option at this point. Again, just strictly in looking at the finances of it, I don't see any situation where, I still don't know how we cut. You know, option 4 saves approximately $1 million. With the technology and curriculum savings, that's $500,000, that's 1.5 in savings. I still don't see how we get to $3 million. I don't see how we could possibly cut 1.5 million in staff. By the combining of some schools, that would certainly lead to some reductions, but it's not going to lead to 1.5 million in reductions. And you know, I think that we're all feeling that if there's going to be a request for additional funds, knowing that this is going to be potentially a multi-year problem with the Student Opportunity Act not ending until FY27, and we've been promised really no additional money from the state until the end of FY27. I would say that possibly look to see if we could get some additional funds to avoid having to make $1.5 million in cuts to teachers and counselors and paraprofessionals, nurses. And to be clear, there's no one on the team feels any of these are good options.
So just a comment or a question. In any of the cases with the options and the additional cuts that were in the other part of this, we're still going to be short. So in any of the cases, we're going to need an override, right? Correct?
Well, we don't necessarily need an override if we do have to proceed and cut 1.5 million in staff. If we do cut that 1.5 million in staff, then again, our class sizes are going to be,
right.
And we're not even counting potentially kids moving in, kids moving out. Again, there's usually a lot of movement in the summer. So we could very well end up with a reduction like that, looking at class sizes in the low to mid 30s, which quite honestly is I feel as though it's untenable in this day and age of education. Things have changed a great deal. Teachers have a tremendous amount to deal with. Our counselors have a tremendous amount to deal with. Our paras. That would be a significant strain that would have a negative impact on students in this district.
Okay, and that would I guess be the staff reductions, additional staff reductions would be in the event that we didn't get an override.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to clarify. Whatever option we go with here, or we select, right, we're still going to be short. Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
I mean, something that's important to consider is that if we have to make cuts and we're able to reinstate some things in May and June, that is something that we may be able to do. There's no guarantee that the teachers are still going to be here, or the counselors or the paras or whatever role they're playing, because there are vacancies elsewhere that can't be filled. The bigger challenge is going to be is if we don't know what buildings we have, if we wait until June, we will not be ready to open in September. Because the scheduling takes a significant amount of time. Significant.
Oh, yeah, understood. Okay.
So,
Yep.
Any questions? Lisa?
Did you find out the answer?
It's on, yes, it's in the full budget detail. It's in line 1110, it's $12,000 this year.
Any further questions? No. Patrick?
So is this at a point where like we can just feel out, like are people ready to vote? Do people want to talk about like what options are they're considering? Like I'm not sure how this works. Like we can't just vote on every one, so I'm not sure how we get to anything. So just kind of some clarification, I guess, on the way forward.
I think we've all not been at this position before, and so there's not a clear way to do it. Any? Okay. Go ahead.
I mean, to get it on the table, so then I move that we continue along with option 4 as our plan B.
A second, but I'm not sure why it's a plan B as opposed to.
Because plan A is override.
If an override doesn't pass.
Well, are we going for a full 3 million in the override though? Because I mean, even if we got $500,000 or $1 million in the override, I'd prefer to save faculty over buildings. So I'm just not sure how we do that.
June?
Prior to any motion being made, I did have my hand up. This is the first time any of this has been brought forward to the public after 4 meetings of talking about closures. So again, I'm wondering at what point are we listening to community feedback, since this is the first time this was publicly presented?
Patrick?
I don't know about you, June, but I've been getting chewed out through email for weeks now, months if not years, about Ashby alone. There have been multiple meetings. Like, I mean, I think everybody's fully aware of the situation. I've been, like, I know that you've been speaking with everybody. I've been speaking with people in Pepperell. Like, I think everybody's fully aware of where we're at. And as far as the options, it's your job as a committee member to make that decision.
None of these options have been put out to the public before. So you're the only person in the entire committee who has even mentioned Ashby Elementary at the meeting.
So then last week the finance meeting a few weeks ago, when there was a lot of people here speaking passionately, they were aware of options that schools could be closing. What does that change?
Which schools are closing?
And what they're,
Makes a difference.
But it's,
And were you not listening to all the people that spoke against closing schools then? Because that is what we're saying that we wanted to do, was listen to community input.
so then is your
Nobody
option to
stood up
close
and
no
said to close
schools?
it.
Is your option to close no schools?
I would prefer to close no schools, yeah.
So
But
that-
if I had
that
to
puts us
close
at-
a school, I certainly
that puts us at
would
$2.5
never
million in
entertain
faculty
closing
cuts.
2 schools.
Everyone, just speak one at a time, please.
So by closing those schools, you're at $2.5 million in faculty cuts. That's class. Brad, if we don't cut any schools, $2.5 million in cuts, are we looking at like high 30s? What are we looking at?
If we don't cut any buildings at all, it would be approximately a $2.5 million reduction in staff. I mean, I'm just guessing, I would say mid to high 30s, possibly 40 in some cases.
I'm pretty sure there's other places to find money, especially when we just announced we have over 2 million in excess in revolving funds. There's a lot of other things that we have looked at. Randy just said she sent $1 million in ideas. So I don't understand why we're not looking at these other things more closely. 1, 2, this is the first meeting that any schools were publicly announced. And 3, closing multiple buildings is very short-sighted and merits a lot of discussion, not a packet given to us a day before a holiday, less than a week before a meeting.
Short-sighted would be making cuts the last 15 years and not having a plan. I mean, there's a lot of things that have been short-sighted. We're out of options. We've sat and gone through the entire budget together and looked for things. Last year, I was against using the R&D because it made this year
You weren't
worse.
here last year, Patrick.
I voted on the budget last year.
Yes.
It was my first meeting. It was my first meeting. And I was very much so against R&D then. And as they've told us now, E&D is not the way to go. Because then when something does break, we don't have money to fix it on more buildings than less now. It just doesn't make sense. It's just a logic argument. Like I don't want to close buildings either, but there's nothing else.
And if we do dip into our revolving funds to answer some things, that's giving away our savings account. And I don't think we can do that because those revolving funds do not grow at the speed that we need them to grow to cover some of our costs. And it's one
How
time.
many savings accounts are we sitting on between revolving funds and E&D and capital plan money? I mean, we can't just tuck a bunch of money aside in the bank and then say, oh, sorry guys, we need more money, now we're gonna fire people and close your buildings, while we're sitting on money still.
We also can't say, hey, we're glad we have 7 buildings and teachers, but we gotta close because the roof went, we don't have the money to fix it. Like, you need those funds. You can't just burn everything dry to save us one more year.
Right,
'Cause
but we
then we're
have
still here
money
next
here,
year.
there, and there. Why do we need it spread all over the place? It adds up. It really adds up. If we took just that money alone, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. And I'm not saying to take that money. I'm saying to look a little deeper. Yeah, nobody wants
We've looked
to
deeper.
lose anyone. Nobody wants to lose staff. Nobody wants to lose admin. You know what? I work on a team of 3 people. One person left, and they said, guess what? We're not going to replace this person. You have to do a little bit more. Yeah, it sucks. You do a little more. Like, that's what people do. Like,
And we've been doing that for a lot of
maybe we
years.
look at what we've added in the last 10
Chair.
years
Patrick.
for positions
Yep.
Chair,
and
may-
for programs.
Can I say
And we
something?
look at those and say they're nice to have, they've been good, but we got by without them before. Maybe we start looking at some of that.
Superintendent Morgan?
So, just a couple things. I do want the committee to be aware, this is early on in the process, nothing is final. We don't have the governor's numbers yet. We simply need a direction so that we can begin working, and if we do need to pivot, we can pivot. As far as using the revolving funds, I went on the record last year of not being in favor of using E&D. We used all of it. We used $2.6 million. This year, we got $1.8 million. We're using all of it again. If we use all of our revolving money, and we have a major emergency in the school district, because we are no longer funding capital, and we're not funding stabilization, we're not going to be able to pay for something that happens. It may seem like there's a lot of money in that, but quite honestly, it's to me, you can't spend everything that you have. We don't have any additional money for emergencies in this district. If a boiler goes, again, I know what Ashby's cost was, but if a boiler goes at this high school, they don't make boilers like they used to. A boiler could conceivably go here. A boiler at this school is not going to be $100,000 or $200,000. It's going to be much more than that, because we have to get something that's going to work with this system that's high efficiency. If we lose refrigeration, again, costs. If we need roofs, we have buildings that are old that are in need of repair. If we use all of our revolving, then we have nothing left. We also have a lease on a turf field that is not part of the budget. And that's something else that's a one-time cost that could be paid off, and we would save money on interest. But to use both revolving accounts and all of our E&D, the state does not recommend using any E&D, and we used all of it. And revolving funds are handled, again, by most districts as if they're managing their own home. Having enough money set aside so that if something happens, ultimately it's the school committee's decision, it's the school committee's money. But I would just add, and again, I would love not to make any of these decisions or to close buildings or to cut staff. I would love to keep everything as it is. The reality is that the state is not coming through for us. And I think we have to look at a couple more years. So yes, there is money. If we spend it all and we encounter a problem, we will not be able to pay for it. We won't be able to fix it. We will have to potentially close school in a particular building. That's it. Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? June?
I just want to clarify that I was not saying we should completely empty all of our funds, but that I do feel that we have enough that we could use some of it towards this.
Will?
Agreed. If we have some one-time cost that makes sense to do that, I would actually, I absolutely agree with that. I think there's a couple of items that we have on the agenda, but I don't think, well, I know there's not $2 million in there because we're spending more than is in there more than gets replaced in that account every year, in those 4 accounts.
And some of these revolving funds we actually have to be careful with and not use, like a students' activities ones. That's their fundraising. We can't touch that.
No, absolutely. There's $2 million not in anything that the students raise or the schools raise themselves.
And the other thing I want to point about some revolving funds is like our student, what is it? Student choice? School choice. School choice. We are not taking any school choice children in. We are not getting extra money coming in. And those kids are aging out of our system. So we are losing that money. So that's one thing to consider when looking at those funds. June?
A comment about option 4. Looking at the cons, it has as many or more cons than most of the other ones. However, the impact, again, closure of only building in Ashby, which I'll reiterate, and entails a lot more than what that fragment of a sentence says, but also length of bus ride from Ashby to Pepperell. So out of the cons, 2 of the 3 cons are potentially against one subset of our students, one community out of our NM district. So to choose the one option that targets a single town doesn't make sense. And again, I think closing 2 buildings is far too extreme. I think that's not a good option at all. None of these are good options, but I think 4 definitely is targets one town over the others.
Any more questions or comments? Patrick, did you second yours? You did second? So we do have a motion on the floor. Are people ready to vote? Or any more questions?
You might want to repeat what it is.
Can we repeat the motion?
Go ahead.
Please.
You want me to remember that? I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but to allow the superintendent to continue on option 4 as our backup plan to an override.
And Patrick seconded it.
Is that close, Rob?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more discussion?
I just want to say that we need to really think of the future. Closing 2 schools leaves us with almost no room whatsoever for any expansion. Should we have In Pepperell, they had, I don't believe it passed, but they had a plan for a 100-unit building, or, set of buildings to go up. There's MBTA buildings, or communities in both Ashby and Townsend now that I believe passed both towns. I don't know if and when anything might come about, but to be short-sighted that we will never get any growth in this town, in these towns, even in the near future. This leaves us with, having to do modular classrooms. I don't think that's a good choice. If we close buildings, we cannot do additions through the MSBA for the next 10 years. If we were short-sighted enough to close buildings and then need capacity again. Don't think it affects renovations, but it does, right on their website say it will affect doing any kind of expansion projects. I think 2 buildings is way too extreme.
Any other comments? June?
Can we have a roll call vote on this, just so it's not whoever talks
Yes,
into the
I
microphone?
planned on doing a roll call vote.
Thank you.
Is everyone ready? Okay, I'm going to go alphabetically. Lisa Bloom.
No.
Bill Berg.
No.
I have the initials right here. I don't know if that-
Will Hackler.
Yes.
Tom Casey.
Yes.
Sorry, I messed up my alphabet there. Jill Twigg.
Yes.
Randy Rush.
No.
June McNeil.
No.
Pat McPhillips.
Yes.
And myself, yes. 5 yeses and 4 noes.
Motion passes.
And the motion passes. That's option 4. Right. I think that's it. I think I did put on an executive session, but we do not need the executive session at this time. So I think we can take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Will, and that's Patrick. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any noes?